every time I get into these kind of situation, I oversleep, I overeat, I overthink, and I get into this cycle. I'm not able to come out of this cycle. And my entire sleep cycle, I'll mess it up. I'll mess up all my learning habits. I will just sit and manifest. Hello, namaskar, adab, salam, sastrikal. Came cho, kasakai. I hope all of you guys are in Mazama. And this is another episode of the Girl Next Door podcast, जहां हम बातें करते हैं दिल से दिल तक. क्योंकि हम बिलीव करते हैं कि अगर कोई कहानी कहीं नहीं गई तो कहीं नहीं गई. And it is very important that you share your story because we believe in celebrating them. Welcome. And today's episode is again very, very inspiring, very, very exciting because we have an amazing guest, an inspiring guest, and her name is Dr. Seema Desai. Welcome to the show, Seema.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here.
We are honored to actually have you here. Dr. Seema Desai was a dentist, is still a dentist. By profession.
I mean, once you're a dentist, you're always a dentist.
Yes. But besides being dentist, she's an author, she's a speaker, she is the host of Happy and Human podcast with Dinesh. And she is also a mindset coach. Oh my God, she's doing such inspiring work through her podcast channel, through her mindset coaching. If you have not followed her yet on Instagram, do go ahead and follow her. Her Instagram ID is Dr. Seema Desai. It's visible. Her picture is there. Yeah. So you can actually see her and her work out there. I just want to go ahead and say a little bit before we begin. There are very few people in this world who decide to leave their well-paid profession to start something from scratch and just in order to follow their own passion and to give back to the community. And Dr. Desai is one of them. Thank you, Dr. Desai, for doing that. We, along with a lot of women at IDEA, are really, really grateful to you for that. And thank you to all our viewers for watching this show. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe the show. I'm going to say it again at the end of the show, but just to remind you guys, we love your support. And this podcast has been brought to you by IDEA USA, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization in Austin. Now let's begin.
Let's get started.
Yes. So, Dr. Desai, tell us all about yourself. How did it all begin?
Okay, so I grew up in a small town in Texas, about 2 hours north of Dallas. In the 80s and 90s, there was a very, very small Indian community. And it was before the days of diversity and equity and inclusion, and any of that was a thing, right? So it was quite difficult and confusing to grow up in that time, in that place, as a South Asian American. Before we hit record, we were talking about how difficult it is to leave your home country and then come to another country where the language is different, the culture is different, the expectations are different, the biases are different.
Right. Absolutely.
And, I know it must have been really difficult for my parents to leave everything that they know and then come here and then raise a child in a completely different school system and everything.
And you were the second generation here.
Yeah. So only
your parents came from India. And what did your parents do?
So my dad is retired now, but he owned an auto repair shop for years and years and years.
Okay.
So he was a mechanic, blue collar Indian immigrant parents. My mom, helped out with the business here and there, and also stayed at home and made,
Primarily, she was a homemaker.
The homemaker.
Got it.
Right. So that was the analogy I like to use is imagine your feet being in two separate buckets, and the buckets are on a sheet of ice, right? So you're just trying to find
your
balance, right? And anytime you any slight movement, you just, it was not an easy childhood, although I recognize there's plenty of privilege, even with all we did not have. There's so much that we did have by way of just being in this country, right?
And when was it? Back in the early 90s?
Yeah. So I was born in 1983.
Okay. We will edit it.
I'm happy with I'm
Yeah.
not self-conscious about that.
Got it.
Yeah. So it was the 80s, 90s.
So in the early 80s is when your parents were here, because if you were
Right.
born here
Yes.
in 1983.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they came earlier than that, and then I
Mhm.
was born here and grew up, born and brought up and grew up in the same town, went to college there. Honestly, I think my parents were not in a place where they felt comfortable letting me leave home for college.
Mm.
I wasn't really encouraged to leave.
Why was that? Was that because of the Indian mindset?
I think so. I
Yeah.
really do. I don't know. I've never really asked, and I've
Got it.
never really explored with them.
Mm.
And so everything I say, I feel like would just be an assumption, and it would be an unfair one because
Got
it would
it.
only be one side of the
Got it.
story, right? However, I did stay at home, and I will own part of that in saying I never pushed to leave,
Got it.
right? So
Like when they said you cannot leave, you were like, okay, it's okay. Like
they
there was a kind of assertiveness in there from your side.
exactly. And they never actually said the words "you cannot leave."
Oh, got it.
It was just more, we have a college here, you're going to be pre-med. And honestly, the college that I went to has a fantastic pre-med program. So it didn't make sense to them why I would even want to leave, right?
And you were the only child.
And I'm the only child, beti. So
Yes.
there was a
The daughter
lot
thing,
of,
yeah.
a lot of confusing, conflicting messaging coming
Yeah.
through, right?
Yeah.
My parents weren't really strict about things like clothes or what I ate or things like that for the most part.
Mhm.
But as I got to like high school, college, I started to notice that they would say, like, oh, why are you wearing the spaghetti straps? You should cover that up, right? Or just dating, all of these things that American kids routinely face. And I think now in India too, it's a little less taboo to have
Yes,
these relationships and things.
absolutely. Like now, if you look at the Gen Z,
Yeah.
it's changed because
Yeah.
India has been westernized a lot, a lot. I was growing up in 90s, like in the early 90s, and we did not had this kind of thing. Like we lived exactly how you were
Yeah.
saying that you lived.
Yeah.
So even though your parents were here, they were still rooted in India.
Totally.
And even though my parents were in India, they were rooted in India. So
Yeah.
I can understand. It's like whatever the normal things which you would see other American kids doing. I'm pretty sure that was not something which was okay with you growing up.
Right. Yeah. So it was confusing and conflicting, and but everything always works out,
Right.
And I did want to say too, just kind of going back to what you had mentioned earlier. I think we all have a tendency to do this as we give away our power.
Yeah.
Right. So we say like, oh, it's my parents, it's the culture, it's my circumstance, the, time, money, resources, whatever it may be. But we have a lot of power within ourselves.
Right. But as a kid, you don't realize
You
that.
don't.
Like when you're growing up in that teenage form and when you're dependent on your parents for every little thing, you don't realize that power. You only realize it when you become independent and when you have started leading your own life in your own way. That's when you realize it.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know like how would a teenager or a growing up kid would realize the power of convincing their parents.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, yes and no, in that there were still things that I got that I had to advocate for, right? Not huge things like leaving home, but little things.
Right.
And so it's like, again, not placing blame or assumptions on anyone, right? So just recognizing that we all have a part to play in our lived experiences.
So you studied in Texas. You studied your dentistry in Texas. And then while growing up, you were like any other Indian kid, but confused
Very.
with the culture around you
Yeah.
and what is right, what is wrong, why other kids are allowed to do certain things and why am I not allowed to do certain things.
Yeah.
Do you think it had any kind of impact on you then, which made you choose this career later on?
The career that I have now?
Right.
I think so, for sure. I don't know that I was conscious of it then, as you mentioned, right? When you're young, you aren't thinking about these things.
Yeah.
But I think, for a typical South Asian, in that time, your options are doctor, lawyer, engineer, something along those lines. And none of these other careers really existed, right? Like podcast host didn't exist.
Oh no.
And if you tried to tell somebody that you wanted to be an author, they would say, there's no money in that. Why would you ever do that? Right. Which is funny because we value education so much
Yep.
as a culture.
Yes.
But
we do.
yeah.
My
So
parents still tell me that why are you doing this podcast thing?
yeah.
Like what is it bringing to you?
Yeah.
Why you're not looking for a job? And I tell them that I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult for me to make them understand that why this enjoyment is very, very important for me. And probably because I have a backing. I have a partner who is working, so I don't have to think about the bread and butter
Right.
part of it right now. But yeah, I mean, as you were saying, when you're growing up, you don't realize that the parents have this mindset that doctor, lawyer, uh, in India there is IS officer, like
Yeah.
you crack the UPSC and MBA.
Yeah.
While we were growing up, MBA was also a thing, but yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
You don't have other option. And this is very strange to me that it was the same thing here as well for you.
I mean, think about it though, because you have risked everything to come here. And you're operating from a very stressful space, right? It's scarcity mindset. And what I mean by that is you're always looking for how things can go wrong, how you failed, how because you've risked everything to be here. And so the last thing you could possibly imagine is your kid growing up at the same economic level or worse than you, despite all those sacrifices that you made, right? Yeah. So it makes sense that they would say, be a doctor, and all of the aunties and uncles that I grew up around, they were all physicians, every single one. So my parents were the odd ones out. And that was also difficult because I definitely felt a class difference, right? They were going on these vacations and some of the aunties would say things like, oh, we bought these earrings at Tiffany and we went to Dallas and we bought these shoes and we went to Neiman Marcus and that was not a world that I understood, right? Like we shopped at Target and Walmart and, our vacations didn't start happening until I was close to finishing high school, which is when he had enough financial security for us to take smaller vacations. Right. So it's just a different world. And I think subconsciously it was like, well, if you become a doctor, then you'll have all of these things. And the subtext is, if you have all of these things, then you'll be happy. So you can imagine, attaining all of those things. And I was the good Indian girl, even to the point of I found a good Indian boy who was also a doctor who, we are, oh gosh, we're 21 years into our relationships.
Wow.
16 years being married. He's been such an amazing supporter, just like your husband has been for you. Yes. And so yes, we love each other. It was a love marriage, but married the good Gujarati boy and did all the things.
So it has to be a love marriage, but under those boundaries, within those boundaries.
But actually. I wanted that too.
Oh, really?
Importantly, I wanted that for myself.
Okay. You wanted a Gujarati boy.
I did.
Oh, you did.
I wanted to raise my kids speaking Gujarati. I don't, even now to my kids, I think get so annoyed because when they were little, we would speak in Gujarati because it's simple, right? Like, do you want this? Do you want to eat this? Are you hungry? Are you tired? But now as they've gotten older and we're navigating emotions and world perspectives and other things, it's become more English. And everything's in English, right? So they'll hear me say like, "Fada nahi kar," because I'm trying to get them like, you can speak in Gujarati. You're just choosing not to, right? The things that you can say, you should still practice. You should still say. But that's my own thing to work through. My own expectations that I need to understand how to befriend and let go. But
why do you think it has to go away? I think it's a good thing to have.
It is, but not to the point where it's causing disharmony in the home. Right? Like I can control whether I speak Gujarati or not. Right. And I can ask my husband to speak Gujarati, which he's not as comfortable as I am. And we can do that. And we did do that, right? Which is why both kids are fluent. And also, if you get so caught up in the details of that conversation isn't in Gujarati, they're talking to each other in English, they're talking to each other in English again, you miss, well, is it the language that's important, or is it the quality of the connection that's important?
Right. But at the same time, I mean, what I want to understand is that maybe you don't have to control it, but ensuring that the culture persists and it goes forward without controlling it, like being mindful of sharing the importance of knowing the language, and then why does it gives you satisfaction when they talk in Gujarati, talking it out. Maybe that is something that needs to happen.
Exactly. And that's, you hit it right on the head. Can we be encouraging and mindful in a way that, the people around you want to cooperate? Because when you get too hard into, and one of the things that I'll say my vasana, right? Like one of them is just perfectionism. And that gets in the way of our happiness. We create our own suffering, right? So when I'm sitting there in my brain, if I'm not conscious of it, I'm picking, oh, they're not speaking Gujarati. Now they're not speaking Gujarati. Now they're not speaking Gujarati. Your brain can fool yourself into thinking they never listen, they never do it, which is not true, right? And so it's a balance of, okay, can I recognize what's actually happening and be encouraging versus this is the hard and fast rule and this is the only way we're going to do it and this is the only way that's acceptable, right? Very, very different energy,
right?
With very different outcomes. I want my kids to want to speak Gujarati. And so that's why I have to be careful about not being too hard on them when they don't.
Right, right. So I'm gonna bring you back a little bit, because we are talking about kids in Gujarati, and I'm gonna touch that point again because there is an important aspect of parenting which I want to address here. But before that, when so you started into learning. Becoming a dentist,
Right.
and then you thought you completed your course, and for how long did you practice?
I practiced on and off for about 10 years, somewhere around there.
And your husband is also a dentist?
He's a pediatric critical care physician.
Got it. And both of you are right now in Austin?
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah.
And so you practiced it for, you said 5 years?
On and off for, about 10 years. So I practiced full time. And then with each kid, I took time off. And then when we moved to Austin from where we were, there was transition periods. And so not full time for 10 years solid.
Got it.
But I did. And in the course of that, wound up feeling, after our first kid, feeling very depressed, very unfulfilled, angry, honestly, very angry.
When was your first kid? After how many years of your marriage?
4 or 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was difficult to, and then you feel guilt because you think, I have everything, right? I have the job, I have the income, I have the husband, the house, the kid. Why am I feeling so angry?
Yeah.
Why am I feeling like it's not good enough? And then you feel the guilt because you should be happy. Then you also feel like, well, I followed what everybody said I should do, so I'm the one that messed up, right? You take it on yourself, even though that's not true. That was kind of where I was at. And it took being depressed and in a very, very dark place for me to actually do something about it and advocate for better for myself.
And would you say that was the time which inspired you to get into life coaching and becoming a speaker?
Yeah, not immediately. I found yoga as almost like a therapy for the depression, even though it was undiagnosed. But my husband said, well, maybe you just need to get out of the house, because I was at home full time, no help. Grandparents were not here. It was just me and this kid. And I had told myself the story of like, well, if I'm not breastfeeding him, then I'm a failure of a mom.
Oh, tell me about that.
Every single feeding, no bottle, no any, like, and it wasn't helpful. And we can get in, that's a whole other podcast episode, right? Of
yes,
breastfeeding, bottle feeding, what do you do? All of that. But that was just a snapshot into my perspective of my own ability, because think about it, as Indian kids, right? You're told, what are your grades, right? If you're not scoring at 100%, where are the other 2 points? Where are the other 5 points? Why aren't you in the top?
Yes, absolutely.
So naturally, my brain goes to,
Nobody sees like you got 98%. People talk about
where's the
not
2%?
your parents talk about.
Oh, yeah.
Where's the 2%?
Yeah.
Why did you lose 2%?
Why did you lose?
What could have you done better to get that 2%?
Mhm.
And that's so frustrating.
It is.
I mean, it does prepares you for better, like you become more competitive, but maybe you don't want to be competitive. You just want to enjoy whatever you're studying.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, and that's another tangent that we could certainly get into. But kind of bringing it back to where I was, it was not serving me, right? That tendency, it's like having your hand on a hot stove. The pain is good for you to know, like, oh, my hand is on something hot and I'm going to get burned. But if you choose to keep your hand on a hot stove, now you're just causing damage, right? For no reason. And that's how perfectionism can really get in our way, is we subconsciously allow ourselves to keep our hands on the hot stove. And that showed up for me in way of, if I'm not breastfeeding this kid every single time, then I'm the failure. And he shouldn't have to suffer because I am not breastfeeding him, right? It doesn't make sense. It's not logical, but that's where I was at. And I know a lot of moms feel that way too. And so just going to that yoga class was not easy, but I found yoga, and then it gradually started to, help. And as also my son was getting bigger, so the needs, their needs shift and change and things. And so eventually it became a passion.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to become a yoga teacher, like a certified instructor. And there was a whole story about, what kind of person leaves dentistry to go teach yoga? Like, you don't need an education for that. Why
was there any? There are many forms of yoga these days.
Yeah.
Which form of yoga were you into?
So I started with Bikram yoga because that was what was close to my house. And that was before any of the other.
And that was the 80s and 90s thing.
Well, I mean, right. This was in the year 2011, 2012.
Oh, really?
Because that was what was close to my house.
Got it. Okay.
A Bikram studio. And that was before I was aware of any of the very negative things that were happening, right? So it was, for me, not a conscious choice of.
People were not.
No, and honestly, it wasn't that I wanted to do Bikram over any other style. It was just what was close, right? So I started out with that, and then just kind of shifted into more. Now I'm more Iyengar yoga style, very slow, methodical. But I still enjoy like the flow of the hatha yoga classes and things. Anyway, but the universe kept saying, like, no yoga instructor thing for you right now. It just wasn't working out. And then I got coaching because I was just at such a low point, right? So I was depressed, but then kind of came out of it a little bit, but still felt really unfulfilled. And really, I was an angry mom. Like, I would get upset at the smallest things. And then I would have this guilt, like, they're just kids. Like, why? Like, my mom, she did the best that she could, but it was not a loving, rosy relationship when I was younger. And I didn't want that for my kids. And so I finally got coaching for myself, really as just like I didn't have an alternative that felt good. Therapy was just something that, like, it's such a taboo thing.
Yeah.
But the coaching changed my life.
Yeah.
Really, really changed my life. It gave me new perspective.
So you did a life coaching too?
Yeah, like, so I got one-on-one private coaching from my yoga mentor.
Got it.
Which was great because he was blending all of these yoga theories, right? But beyond what's just the asana, but the actual ahimsa and the detachment to the outcome and all of these things that is talked about in the Gita and everywhere else, right? But
do you still practice it every day?
Not every day, but I mean, yeah, I practice. And actually, let me rephrase that. I don't have a formal asana practice that I do every day, but every day is yoga, right? Every day am I speaking to myself with nonviolence? Am I coming from a place of nonviolence? Am I, allowing myself to be open to what happens and find the joy in it instead of being angry about it or forcing my way forward. So every day is a yoga practice. Yeah.
And from there, how did you enter into the coaching thing? Like,
So yeah, I really wanted to. That was right around the pandemic by that time. And I had a friend that I'd met through Instagram. I'd started this Instagram platform, not really knowing what I was going to do. But I thought, I don't like dentistry and I don't know what else to do. And the yoga thing, maybe I can talk about yoga on my Instagram page. And one of the girls that I met through Instagram, who also had a page, said, "Hey, I'm going through this thing called coach training in the school, and I think you would really like it because it's very yogic in principles. Check it out." And so I did, and I thought, oh, that makes sense. I thought it was really something, these skills that would help me be a better person, regardless of whether I decided to make it a business or not. And it has been really, truly life-changing. Getting coached, but then also learning how to be a coach. So the job of a coach, I know, would you mind if I explained what that
100%.
is?
Yes, please.
Because I think there's a lot of misconceptions around sports coaching, which is very different than mentorship versus friendship versus all of these things. And so in a true coaching relationship, the person who is the coach, their only job is to see where your perspectives are at and help you uncover your blind spots.
So before you go a little deeper there, a question for you.
Yeah.
A lot of people confuse coaches with therapists.
Right.
What is the prime difference there?
So coaches should not diagnose medical conditions, things like anxiety, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, any of those things. Therapists are qualified to do those things and provide supportive treatment. Coaches, I think the best way to describe this is therapy is for you if you're still if you are not functional in day-to-day life, right? So you are really struggling with depression to the point where you can't move forward, or if you're really, there's a lot of other diagnoses, right, that prevent people from being functional human beings in the moment because of past experiences. Things like trauma, right, is a really big one, in which case therapy is going to really be the best thing, is so that you can make peace with your past, so that you can be present and functional wholly as a human being here and now. Coaching is, all right, you're here, you're able to work, you're able to, you have your relationships, you have your family, you have your this, you have your that, and you're feeling unfulfilled. You're feeling stuck. There's a goal that you have in mind that you're not sure how to get to. That's where coaching is so powerful, because coaching unlocks what is best for you, and you as the client get to decide, right? No one has your expertise. No one has your life. So as a coach, it's not my job to give you advice or to tell you what to do. It's my job to get in touch with my inner wisdom and let that inner wisdom unlock your inner wisdom so that you can make decisions for your life that are in accordance with where you are at and what is best for you.
Got it. So, and there are also differences in coaching, like life coaching. There are life coaches, then there are mindset coaches, then there are yoga coaches. So, how do you different? And then there are career coaches, growth mindset coaches. So, there are a lot of terms floating out there in the coaching side of the world as well. Where do you what is your forte? First question is that, and then the second is, how are these coaches different, or is there a similarity between all of these? Like, you can pick any one and then you can start navigating from there.
Yeah. Well, coaching is still pretty unregulated, and so as a result, you will see that's why there's all this confusion and all of these different terms being thrown around, is because there is not a set definition. But so the ICF is really the global gold standard. It's an International Coaching Federation. So as an ICF certified coach, I adhere to what they say is considered coaching, which is
You said ICF.
ICF,
ICF. Okay.
International Coaching Federation.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because anyone can wake up and say, I'm a coach, right? I've written a book, so I can coach you to write a book. But that's not coaching necessarily. I'm not in that relationship to know, right? Like I don't, but when we find, very often the danger is that we have people calling themselves coaches and they're telling people what to do, right? They might have a framework or here's how I did it, but that doesn't mean that that's how it will work for you, right? The universe is all knowing. You are a reflection of the universe. And how can I possibly know what is in your path, what you're meant for?
Yeah.
Right. So it's not my job to tell you what worked for me and make you do that. It's my job to help you unlock your inner wisdom so that you can make these decisions that are best for you. Right?
Got it.
And so I think that we just need to be careful when we run across things like that. As far as what I do, I mean, I've been called a number of things: life coach, executive coach, any number of things. The reality is the coaching is all the same, especially if you're trying to adhere to those standards that have been put forth by this governing body called the ICF. So it's all life coaching, right? I always think it's funny when people say work-life balance because work is a part of life.
Yeah.
And there is no balance, right? There's no perfect set point where everything's like, okay, set, balanced, right? It's all integration. It's all flowing. It's all,
you prioritize.
it all changes.
Yep.
So I think I'm comfortable with saying I'm a life coach, but absolutely wouldn't be wrong to say, I mean, I've helped people in executive positions with their work. But when I coach the whole person. So what you're experiencing at home is absolutely going to impact what you're experiencing at work and vice versa.
Yep. So do you think that when you coach, the number of people you have coached in your life, that makes you a better coach, or how should I frame it? That makes you a more experienced coach versus a less experienced coach. So, say for example, there are two coaches in front of me, and I need to take a coaching session. Should I be thinking about like what kind of certifications and education and methodology this person is following, or should I be more concerned about how many people have you coached? What kind of personalities have you coached? What kind of the people you have coached? What were their work titles, the job titles.
Right.
So should I be more bothered about that, or should I be more researching about the person's own qualification and what I am seeking from that person?
Right. I think it's very nuanced. There's not a right answer. However, I feel like go with what makes sense for you, right? I'm an ICF certified coach, but that certainly does not mean that it automatically disqualifies someone who is not, right? Like all of these big names like Bill Robbins or, sorry, not Bill, is it Tony Robbins? I had a dental school attending who had one name and then the other, like Bill and Tony, and I get confused. But there's a lot of big names in the coaching industry who are not technically certified, but are fantastic coaches and have helped people get real results for themselves. So I wouldn't say that that's everything is dependent on whether you're certified or not certified. It's really, does that person resonate with you? Do you feel like you are able to be safe and fully transparent with that person? A true coach is going to be able to be effective with anyone, no matter whether they're from the same professional background or not, or they've had the same life experiences or not, because our job as a coach is to be extremely neutral in our thinking so that we can reflect back and be there for you in the way that you need as the client. That being said, just like every doctor is not for every patient, every coach is not for every client.
Got it. So you talk a lot about holistic health, and you have been professing about it through your social media channels. Tell us the importance of holistic health and what does it actually mean? Like, what does it truly mean when you say, people should focus on being holistically healthy?
So, when you go to the grocery store and you buy berries and then you just put them in the fridge and then like 2 days later, you pull them out to eat them, and half of them have gone bad because there's that one, right? I think that's what we as humans tend to do, is we want to compartmentalize and say like, oh, this is my work life and this is my home life, and this is, what I work on with my MD versus my acupuncture, but we want to break these up into different compartments. But the reality is, if one part of your life is not functioning healthfully, you as a person, you're a sum of all of those parts. You cannot be fully functioning at your highest potential if there's parts of you that are needing help, needing support, right? So that one bad strawberry can spoil the whole thing. Just like if you have a work environment that's really, really unfulfilling, it can definitely, spoil your home life and the way you self-care and all of that. So that's one lens of holistic care. But also too, recognizing that not everything, and I'm saying this as a Western trained medical professional, what they teach us in becoming doctors, that's only part of what we need to know to keep us healthy. I absolutely believe there's a place for modern medicine. We need to, have these regular well-check visits and things like that. But what is becoming more highlighted now, but that hasn't always, is the power of the breath. How you sleep, what kinds of food are you eating, what time are you eating, how much water are you drinking, and putting on that Ayurvedic lens of the tamasic foods versus the sattvic foods or the rajasic foods, right? So there's many, many, many facets to this.
So, and people, and you're saying that people need to actually take care of all these aspects when they think about being holistically healthy. You just cannot focus on like one aspect of it and think that you're healthy.
Right. I mean, I can't get my 8 hours of
It's
sleep.
mind, body, and soul.
Absolutely. You have to harmonize everything. And it's easy to get overwhelmed and think like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do all of these things?
Okay, so
right?
this is this is me, and I am just thinking exactly the same thing.
Right?
So I'm that person who is like completely overwhelmed with tons of things. I left my job, as I was telling you. I left my job in a space where my work life became very toxic. I was dealing with a very toxic manager, and I was not enjoying my job at all, even though product management is something which really keeps me going. I love it. But but I was not enjoying it.
Yeah.
And then I decided that I'm gonna leave my job. A couple of weeks later, I heard that uh, my entire team was laid off after I left.
Wow.
So at that point in time, I really felt that whatever I did was right.
Yeah.
But I started applying for jobs, and the
Mhm.
market, the market has gone really bad
Yeah.
on the IT and the software side of the world. And that kind of made me find nothing.
Mm.
Like I would apply to jobs and I would find nothing.
Yeah.
And I started doubting myself.
Of course.
So what that does to me is every time I get into these kind of situation, I oversleep, I
Mhm.
overeat, I overthink, and I get into this cycle. I'm not able to come out of this cycle. And my entire sleep cycle, I'll mess it up. I'll mess up all my learning habits. I will just sit and manifest.
Yeah.
which is not going to help.
Right.
Manifestation is actually working towards your goal.
Right.
You just cannot sit in one place and think that everything will come to you.
Exactly.
So what do you have to tell to people who are facing this kind of symptom? And I'm giving you my example, but
Sure.
I'm pretty sure that you would have come across tons of people who have similar kind of challenges. So my next question was that, one, what do you suggest in scenario like this? Second, what are some of the common challenges you have seen people facing whom you have coached so far?
Yeah.
And how, like, what do you suggest them?
Well, my job is to really build awareness as to how people are thinking. Because once you can't fix what you don't know, right? So the beautiful thing about this is once you become aware of what is happening, oftentimes that's when your intuition will kick in and you'll be able to say, okay, what am I going to do differently? It comes, that next right thing comes from within your soul.
But what if it doesn't come?
And that's where, that's why people come get a coach, right? It's like, and I've been there myself. There's still times where I get stuck. And, you know, you said a lot of things. First of all, I want to normalize all of that. We've all been there. And the reflection that I have is that we have become masters at avoiding, right? If something doesn't feel good, then we find ways to become numb to it. We're going to sleep through it. We're going to eat through it. We're going to watch Netflix through it. Whatever, insert whatever thing, right? And the issue with this becomes, it's like you said, a self-fulfilling prophecy. So when everything that you experience is generated from the thoughts and beliefs that you hold, right? Inner conflict will create external conflict. Inner peace will create external ease, peace, joy, success, all of those things. And so when we're conflicted inside, we're not in line, our mind, body, soul is not in line, then you will start to see this turbulence, and it will manifest as things like, worrying, stress, perfectionism, the desire to control, the desire to avoid, being restless, like really restless, right? Just unable to just sit there and watch a movie, for example. Like it'll be
something is going on.
Something, something.
Yeah.
And we may fall victim to everything. We'll say, oh, this happens only to me,
Tell those stories.
Yes, like, woe is me. This is what happened to me. And we lose sight that nothing is happening to you. Things are happening for you. And it's up to us to decide, okay, am I going to take this and allow it to define me? Or am I going to recognize that this is an opportunity for me to get better, right? And so the next question, of course, becomes how, right? And when I lead people through, one of the things that has really been effective for me, and what I teach people before we start coaching together, is what I call the intuitive leadership process, where basically you live your life according to how you lead yourself, right? So when you create awareness of, oh, I'm in this mode. In my book, I talk about it as the guard mode. This is the ahankara, right? The ego that's talking and saying, this isn't good enough. I'm not good enough. You're judging people, places, yourself, the situation as not being enough. Then you start to go down this path and make decisions accordingly. But when you create awareness and recognize that's not true, this is the ego talking. This is not the soul talking. This is not the enlightened person within me talking. This is not the Atman or Brahman in me that's talking.
Right.
This is fear. This is ego. You can't listen to that, right? We so often fall to listening to all of these doubt and frustration and anxiety, instead of learning, honestly, first and foremost, to just sit with the discomfort that you're feeling anxious.
So would you say that most of the people whom you have coached or whom you have come across, discomfort and telling stories is a common pattern which you have seen?
It's a human thing.
Yeah.
It's a very human thing, right? Like, I myself still tell stories because I'm human. I'm not yet a realized person.
Yeah.
And so that's why when you have somebody from the outside listening, you can very easily recognize, like, this is a story you're telling yourself, right?
You're not in the witness mode every time.
Exactly.
And you have to be in a witness mode every time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
I at this note, I just want to tell all the people who are watching this right now, or all my friends who think that they are overthinkers, trust me, it's not just you. There are tons of people out there, not just women, men and women, and the LGBTQA community, like anybody who identify as human being. We all go through this phase, And it's okay. It's okay to be an overthinker at time. It's okay to, be in that discomfort at time. And it's not just you who is facing this. There are many people who are facing it.
Absolutely. The key is, are we going to do something about it?
Right.
Right. And importantly, before we hit record, we were talking about not judging yourself, being kind to yourself.
Yeah.
So can you recognize, oh, I'm in this state of ego, fear, blame, shame, judgment, embarrassment, guilt, anxiety, worry, any of these stressful, yucky, I call them like lower vibration emotions. You know, can you recognize that that's what you're feeling and say, okay, that's a human emotion. You would never expect a lion not to roar, right? So anger and happiness are human emotions. Why would you not experience both? You are human.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wanted to ask one question here. And this is related to a little bit towards your background and you growing up. So you, I don't know if it would be right to say this, but you are right now at the as a bridge which stands between the South Asian community and the American community, because you have been born here, but you have been raised as a South Asian.
Sure.
Um, do you, first of all, how often do you find yourself in a situation where you feel that, it's very difficult to connect with the South Asian mindset? That's one thing. And vice versa, like with the American mindset, because you are at the, you are right in the middle. Um, and so that's one thing. Second, how many times you feel that it's the South Asian community is way reserved when it comes to talking about coaching, going for a coaching versus, the American culture or the American people?
Yeah. Let me see if my brain can sort of process those two, because they're separate questions.
Right.
The first one you were asking was how do you navigate both worlds, right?
Do you even feel that two worlds exist? Let's start there.
I mean, obviously when I was younger, I did. And now for me, I can just sort of come from a more neutral place of recognition that these are more Western versus Indian. But for me, I so much of it has become just a part and integrated. Again, going back to not fighting your emotions, not fighting the cultures, and recognizing that there are strengths and weaknesses with both. So much of our South Asian culture is deeply valuable and is not addressed, or is just now beginning to become addressed, right? Things like breath work. So kind of going back almost to your question earlier, how do I break free from some of these tendencies? The breath is a powerful tool. And that's something that for centuries we've known as from the South Asian culture. But it's something that as modern society, both Eastern and Western, we've started to ignore. And so now, we have the opportunity to, for me, my life it's great because I get to kind of reconnect with, see where something might be better supported with elements from the other culture and fuse that.
And when you say element, like you infuse it, but so you said you find strengths from both these cultures, but at the same time, there is a lot of variation in these two cultures. And would it be right to say that irrespective of all this variation, the challenges or are the same across both the cultures? Like when people come to you for coaching, more or less they are facing similar kind of challenges.
I think so, because again, we're going back to that human trait of telling ourselves a story, right? It's a story. No matter what, you can say, when I first started coaching, I wanted to focus only on female physicians and dentists because that was my background. Very quickly, I realized like these stories of not being valued in the workplace, or, having as much to do at home and having the same responsibilities at work, difficulty advocating for ourselves for fear of being misconstrued as pushy or emotional or irrational. Those are all very similar to women across the board, right? Whether they're in law or engineering or corporate America or tech or at home, the stories might look a little bit different, but the root of it is the same.
And when you say root of it is the same, do you feel that we as women have a lot of like you were talking about that pressure of breastfeeding and how you felt guilty that you are not giving enough, and this is a common phenomenon, or I would say this is a common thinking across the board.
Yeah.
I was listening to a podcast recently, and on that somebody said that we women are always judged, especially mothers.
Oh yeah.
If you are a mother, if you're taking too much care of your kid, you're considered that clingy mother. If you're taking less care of the kid, you are considered a mother who's not at all bothered. If you're breastfeeding, you're judged in a certain way. If you're not breastfeeding, you're judged in a certain way. In fact, the way you deliver your baby, whether it's cesarean versus
home birth,
yeah,
natural in the hospital, drugs, no drugs, the judgment is going to be there everywhere.
Why is it there on mothers a lot? What do you think? Like, what could be the reason that women are judged so much, especially like in the South Asian culture? I don't know about the American culture a lot, so you can throw some light in there. But I have seen right, left, and center. Like you are judged at every point in your time. Why? Why is that?
Well, judgment really is a human, it comes from the ability or the desire to be safe, right? If you think back to before modern times, we only inherited the genes of the ancestors that survived long enough to propagate, right? Yeah. How did they survive? By quickly judging the situation of, is this safe or is this not safe, right? Is this a rattlesnake or a stick, right? So what we've developed over time is a hyper-aware tendency to judge. And then being part of a tribe was our safety, right? Being ousted from that tribe as being because we were different, the judgment sets in, right? Like, oh, that person, she's different from what we as a tribe do. Different means unsafe. Cast her out, right? And that's a death sentence, right? But not
Back
now.
then, yeah.
Right. But we're still operating from an outdated operating system.
Right.
So that's where the work of, all of this, what Krishna says to Arjun, in the entire Gita, it is all about undoing this tendency to operate from fear, ego, judgment. That's the work we get to do as spiritual beings in a human body, is the work of self-actualization, recognizing when we are in judgment, recognizing that is mostly, unless you're truly in a life-threatening situation, there's a lot of falsity and assumptions that are just not true there. And can we connect with our breath and our bodies to help bring us back, what I call crossing the bridge, into the more spiritual state? So we can then act and make decisions from a place of peace and not from a place of fear.
I know it would be a redundant question here, but how spiritual are you? And what do you think, like being spiritual, how does it add to, being a person who you are, or, just getting out of that place of judgment and ego and fear? Like, do you think spirituality really helps?
Hugely. And I would say I want to distinguish between being religious versus spiritual, right? Because my parents were religious in that, my mom would always light these, you have, on this day we do 11 diyas, and on this day we fast, and it's a lot of rituals that, if you really ask, it's like, oh, I don't know, it's just because it's Wednesday or because it's this month or whatever, right? And not to take away from the very deep meaning that must be behind all of those things,
absolutely, right? It always has.
Right? So I'm not saying that it's meaningless, but if you don't understand it, then it becomes just like a rote memorization. You're just doing it and it has no meaning for you. So it's not serving you spiritually.
Right.
Right. So I think the beauty is being able to be more spiritual in that, recognizing that many of the lessons that we are gifted with in, Vedanta, they're also present in Islam and Christianity. It's just we've allowed modern times to twist what is being said and how it's being said.
Right, absolutely.
And then we find this disconnect, and then it's like we other them, like, oh, they're Christian, we're Hindu, they're Muslim, they're, Jewish. It doesn't serve anybody.
Yeah. The core messaging you're saying is same, and I absolutely agree with that. And that reminded me with that diya thing. I remember asking the same thing with my mom, that why do we do diya like in morning and evening? And she said we have been doing it, and it's a way to worship God. But then when I went a little deeper into it, what I found out was that it was a way to bring your attention into, like, inside, when you are at the temple doing that diya in a circular motion.
Yeah.
So you are busy your entire day. You cannot be in that state of witness and in the state of peace entire day.
Right.
So they said, okay, why don't you do it once in the morning, once in the evening?
Yeah.
And that time, it doesn't mean that when you're doing this, you half of your mind is at whether the pressure cooker has whistled or not,
Right.
or whether my kids have sat down to study or not.
Right.
That time when you're doing it, focus on that light, like do it, and you'll see the difference when you do that. So when I learned that, I felt, oh, okay, this is why we are doing this.
Right.
This is why this is all happening. And you said it right. Religion and spirituality are often confused,
Right.
and often intermingled, but it's not.
It's not. And I mean, if we look at some of the religious practices across different faiths, even the Catholics have this, they light candles and things, and it makes sense, right? That the human brain, we're so visual, looking physically at a lamp and feeling the heat from that. And then you're doing this repetitive circular motion. And even, one thing I learned fairly recently was the why we clap when we're singing bhajans, and the gantri, and all of that is to clear that energy. It's a different frequency, right?
Yes.
It's not just because we're, these like hippy dippies doing, something that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
There's a real reason there.
Right. When you're ringing that bell, basically, if I don't know if you have noticed, but a lot of time I notice that if I have anything going in my mind, that brings my attention back to where I am at that moment. So it just brings that, and it just, as you said, clears out the energy. You'll feel that energy being released if you start noticing it.
Right.
So moving on to the next part.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about you as a life coach and speaker and all that. I want to touch on your book side. Like, you have authored a book.
Yeah.
What was the core messaging of the book, and what made you write that book?
The core messaging of the book is really a lot of what we've been discussing. Navigating emotion. So the book is called Connected: Discovering Your Inner Guides. And I always say it's written for kids ages 8 to 80, because we're all just big kids, right? Trying to figure it out. Nobody knows what they're doing.
It's available on Amazon.
Available on Amazon. And the whole thing was, when I was telling you I was getting coaching because I was an angry mom, and you would hear people say things like, you need to just calm down. It's not a big deal. Don't flip out. And I would think to myself, yeah, if I knew how to calm down, don't you think I would have?
Would have, yeah.
Like, it doesn't feel good for me physically to be angry. And I just didn't have a way to calm down. And so coaching really helped me recognize these thought patterns, right? And coaching, it's really just a modernization of what, again, is in ancient scripts, right? So this is not new material by any means. But this idea of the ego playing with the highest self, the Atman, whatever you can call it, light and dark, the shadow versus the enlightened self. And when I recognized, how to recognize, oh, this is my ego talking, this is judgment and fear. And then what steps do I take to get myself to a place of peace, so that then the actions I'm taking are getting me the results that I want.
Thank you so much to all our listeners for tuning in to this episode of The Girl Next Door. We are really, really grateful and thankful to each and every one of you who join us every Saturday to listen to Girl Next Door Trailblazers story. And I'm Snehakashyapthakur, your girl next door, signing off from this episode.